Hello, I'm Amy with Clay Horse Pottery, and today I'm going to be doing some demos for you all on how to use the Black Squirrel Creations Mug Plug. Today we're going to use the 314. There are a couple of different ways to use the mug plug, and I'm just going to show you the ones that I'm more familiar with and that I use commonly, just depending on what it is I'm trying to accomplish with my mug. I've already cut my clay today, and I used a template. Today I'm going to make a mug that's 4.5 inches tall, and this is wet clay, not dry clay. So remember, this is going to shrink. So I've got 4.5 inches tall by 12 inches long, and that allows you for your bevel cuts on the ends where you're going to overlap your clay to create your seam. And like I said, I've already pre-rolled my slab. I've cut it to fit my template, and I've even rolled some texture in. Now, whether or not you choose to have texture is up to you. I'm a texture girl, so I kind of like some texture. And today I used, because it's getting close to Easter, I used this cute little Easter egg rolling pin. And as you can see, it does not quite go the length of my clay, which is fine. You don't have to. If you don't have a 12-inch roller with a pattern on it that you want to use and you find one that's shorter, you can do that. And if it has one of those continuous patterns that you don't really have an edge, you can just continuously roll it one side, roll it the other side without too many issues. Because this has a very distinct pattern, it's kind of hard to do that. So what I did was I rolled my pattern into the center of my slab piece, and then I used these little hand rollers, and you can use whatever hand rollers you want. This is a 3D printed roller. This is a Sambal little wooden hand roller if you have an NKM roller or whatever roller you choose. And you can do your edge lines. And then everyone always says, yeah, but then you're going to have a seam and there's no smooth transition from one texture to another. Not true. They also make these little wheels that have many different textures on them, and they work great. So if you take that and you go to the edge of your center texture and you roll that in, that is your little dividing line between your textures. What I also like these for is they are fabulous for hiding the seam. If you are the kind of potter that thinks that seams are unsightly and you think they make the work look unfinished, you can always take some of these little small little edge rollers and roll it up your seam, and I can show you that when we get to that point. But that just helps to hide it and makes it a little more cohesive. So from there, now that I have my slab cut, there's two ways that you can use your mug plug. The traditional way is to stand your clay body up and wrap your clay around it while it's standing up and folding your edges over. The other way that you can use it is to use the handle, press it up against your chest, drape your clay over the top. Using your hand, you can turn it over, and then you can see to join your seams. We'll show you both techniques today. Regardless of what technique you choose, there's one thing that you need to do every time you cut a slab to put it on your mug plug, and that is you need to cut your bevels. Whether you use a knife tool, whether you use a needle tool, or you use a fancy schmancy little bevel cutter. Either way, doesn't matter. It's dealer's choice. So, I personally like my bevel cutter. There's a long end and a short end. So with this bevel cut, you're going to get a very exaggerated long cut. With this one, you're going to get a very short little blunt cut. I prefer the longer one. And the reason for that is that it helps your seam to sit flatter. Also gives you more surface area of clay connection. So how do you do that? Let me show you. So you're going to take your cutter, if you have one of these, you're just going to set it up against your clay, and you're going to run it. I always keep my thumb here because it wants to push the clay, especially if it's wet. So I always put my thumb here and I just slide my bevel cutter down the side of my clay into my thumb. And I wasn't paying close attention, so let me do that again because I have a little uneven cut with my bevel here. That's better. And then we're just going to roll these little scraps up and use them somewhere else. So how do we get that opposite bevel on the other end? Well, if you're using a bevel cutter, you're going to want to take your slab and you're going to want to flip it over. You're going to start at the same end in the same direction, because when you flip it back, they're going to be opposite, and I will show you that. So you're going to cut your bevel again. And again, you can do this with a knife. You can do this with a pen tool. You can use this with a bevel cutter. And I have a couple different kinds. This one's just really handy and easy to use. I have the Dirty Girls one, but I don't like where the screws are. They seem to always bump my clay and put dings in it. So now that that's done, I'm going to flip that over. Make sure you have some slip and a scoring tool, because you're going to need that. So from here, I'm going to decide, because my texture has a direction, I'm going to put it so that when I set it up, the pattern is facing the right side up and not upside down. Also, before you start, if you have a maker's mark, you're going to want to mark your mug before you go any farther. I'm just going to take my little bitty maker's mark. It just has the initials of my pottery on it, and I'm just going to find a little indiscreet place to set over here in this little viney texture. Some people choose to put their maker's mark on their base. Some people choose to put it in the bottom or middle of their body. It's up to you. Either way. So for those of you who like it on the body of your mug, that's just a little suggestion, but to do it before you start to wrap your clay. So now that we're at this stage, like I said, you can take your Mugg Plugg and you can stand it up, and you can take your slab and you can wrap it around your plug. And then turning as you go, you're going to line up your seams like so. Now, that's one way of using it. The other way, and some people find this easier, it's really just a matter of which one you like better. Take your clay slab and drape it over your Mugg Plugg. Use your handle, lift your plug. You're just going to fold your seams and make sure the seam that you're folding in is the one that faces outward, because that's the one you need against the Mugg Plugg form. Take your other hand, and you're not putting a lot of pressure because, again, I have texture and I don't want to mess that texture up. And you're just going to fold that texture over. And as you can see, I have a little more than I need, and that's okay. And let me show you why. It's better to have more than you need and have to cut a little off than to be short and then your clay bodies don't meet. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take that, I'm going to press it together so I can see where my seam meets. I'm just going to take a needle tool or a blade, and I'm just going to mark that edge to let me know that's where I need to make my cut. And I'm going to do that on the top and on the bottom. I'm going to lay this back out. Now, the one that I marked is the one that's on the opposite side. So we're going to flip this over, put our texture down, find my little marks here. Make sure I've got them nice and lined up, and then I'm going to take my bevel cutter and I'm going to recut my bevel. But the first thing I need to do is start with a straight edge, because now my bevel cutter isn't going to reach the new section. So I'm going to cut this piece off, and I'm going to recut my bevel. Just put our scraps away. Alrighty. So now that we have that accomplished, we're going to make sure our clay is around our mug plug. Whether you drape it or you stand it up, it really is a matter of preference to what is more comfortable to you. Now that I have this, I'm going to take my banding wheel, and I just have some circular birchwood forms that I like to use when I'm making pots, and that has dark clay. So let's flip that over, because we don't want to contaminate our light clay with our dark clay. Excuse me. So now that we have this up here and we see that our seams do meet, and you still get right about 1/8 to 1/16 of overlap, and that's perfect. Now we're going to take our slab and we're going to slip and score. So if you're doing it, standing it up, you're going to slip and score this side, and you're going to slip and score your other inside bevel. And then you're going to push your seams together, and you're going to take your finger and you're going to roll from the bottom up to the center and from the top down to the center. And this helps to keep you from getting this wonky off-centered clay line in your seam. That happens as you're pushing that clay because you're displacing it with your finger. And as you're displacing it, that clay needs to go somewhere. Sometimes it pops up above your rim, sometimes makes you shorter or longer down here, and you end up with these little bumps that you can always take a Surform and level those out. Now, if you're holding your clay form this way, if you're holding your Mugg Plugg in this direction, you're going to do the same thing. You're still going to slip and score your outer and your inner bevel, and you're still going to line them up and press them together. Now, my Mugg Plugg is extremely well used, so I find that I don't really have to put a lot of worry into it sticking, because it has lots of dry, dirty clay dust. If it is new to you and you've not used it and it doesn't have all these dried up crumb dusts of clay, you need to make sure you take cornstarch, rub it all around your Mugg Plugg, and I just have a little makeup brush. Rub it all around your Mugg Plugg, the bottom and the body, to ensure your clay doesn't stick. And if your clay is really wet, you can also take some cornstarch and put it into a sprinkler, and you can sprinkle it on your clay body itself, or you can sprinkle it on your Mugg Plugg. But this just is your insurance policy that when you need to remove the clay from the Mugg Plugg, it happens easily and doesn't get stuck and distort your mug. So just for the sake of you being able to see what I'm doing, I'm going to attach my clay standing up so that you can see it. So like I said, we're just going to slip and score our inner and outer seam here, our little bevel marks. And you want to make sure that you get a really nice layer of both your scoring and your slipping for your connection. Then you're going to take your hands and you're going to push them together, overlapping your seam. And you're just going to kind of tap them to get them to stay there so that when you move your hands away, it's not going to fall apart. Now that I have my seams together nice and tight, oh look, and that wasn't even on purpose, and my vines are matching up. You're going to take your finger and you're going to roll from the bottom. You're going to roll up. Excuse the finger. And you're going to make sure you keep your finger dry. So I have a little towel over here that I use because the slip is squirting out and I don't want to mess up my texture. So I'm going to wipe my finger as I need to make sure that I'm not transferring that slip to a part of my mug that I don't really want it on. And I'm just tapping. I'm not pushing really hard. I'm not pulling. I'm not pushing. I'm just tapping, pressing, rolling. And then again, from the top, we're going to roll in the downward direction to the center. And you shouldn't press really hard if you have a texture, or you're going to distort your texture and you're not going to get to see it any longer because you're going to press it out. But as you can see, doing the rolling technique, you're not getting that bump of excess clay where you've gone from the bottom and pushed it together and rolled it all the way up to the top. And you don't have it at the bottom from doing it in the opposite direction. By going top to center and bottom to center, you totally omit that issue. Now, if you look at my clay from the top, you can see my seam there and how it overlaps, and from the bottom you see the same thing. So now what we need to do is we need to finesse these connections. And there's a few ways to do that. You can do that with a smoothing tool. You can do it with a rib. You can do it with your finger if you like. I like to take a little silicone tool, dab it in just a little bit of water, and I like to run it across that seam just to kind of smooth it over. And I'm trying not to distort the top of my mug here. I'm just trying to make it so that you don't see that line, and making sure that it makes a good connection that won't split on me later on as I'm working with my clay body. So you can see there, I've just smoothed that out in the top. And we're going to do the same on the bottom. And I'll hold it like this so that you can see me do this. I need to roll that just a little bit. Now, one thing you need to keep in mind is the very bottom of your mug plug has a little taper to it. And this is really good because this is going to help to seat your base to your mug and get a really good connection without worrying about them falling apart or popping a seam. So you're just going to take your finger and roll it in an inward direction and form this bottom part of your clay body to your mug plug so that you're kind of starting that bevel in that will work wonderfully for our foot later. Or not our foot, I'm sorry, our base. And then you're going to take your smoothing tool and you're going to go in the opposite direction. So this is the way that it wants that the bottom part of this is moving, and the top is moving this way. So on the bottom, we're going to push in the direction the clay wants to go, this way. And on the top, we're going to smooth it back across in this direction. And we're just going to keep doing that back and forth until we've closed our seam. So we don't have that line. And you can always take your finger and smooth that out a little bit. But we're not going to really see this anyway because this is going to be hidden by the base of our mug. You basically just want to ensure, and I'm going to have to flip this up just so I can see better what I'm doing here. Just to smooth this out. And like I said, you can use that. You can use a rib. You can use a silicone tool. You can even use your finger, which I do a lot. God gave us two great, wonderful tools with our hands, and they can do miraculous things. So now that that is done, we're going to set this up, and we're just going to go around, and I like to take my finger and just kind of round off that sharp edge of the sidewall, just to make sure I don't forget to do it later, because sometimes that happens. And I'll take my rib and just kind of smooth it all the way around, which is a really good practice to make sure, just again, that you're really reinforcing the connection of that seam. Alrighty. There'll be a lot of finessing later. I'm a little OCD when it comes to things like that. So now that that's done, one of the things you can do is take your silicone tool, whether they look like this or they look like these, doesn't really matter. You can take that tool and go in and you can finesse all of your seam into your texture and make it a lot less visible. Easier said than done when it's turned away from me. But I'm not really pulling, I'm just kind of rolling and tapping and then taking those very fine ends and just feathering them out so you don't notice as much of a seam in your work. Now again, you don't want to pull it in the direction that will take it off. I'm just pressing. I'm putting pressure in this little groove to kind of hide my seam here. It's okay to go up and down. It's okay to go in the same direction that you folded the clay over in. But if you pull back, a lot of times that will result later on in a popped seam. So I'm just using a little bit of slip because my clay is getting a little on the dry side on these edges, and I don't want them to crumble and look silly and do horrible things to me later in the kiln. So, like I said, you can spend endless amounts of time finessing your mugs, joining your textures and your seams and getting them as close to perfect as you like. And but that's more for someone who's not an embracer of the seam. And for me, I don't know, it goes both ways. Sometimes I like the seam to be seen. Other times, I'm not a big fan. It just depends on the end result that I'm trying to achieve in that moment. Okay, now that we have this one is really nice and sealed up, we're going to move to the inside. And we're just going to pop that off. And now you can see we have a seam on the inside of our mug that needs our attention. So you, again, can use a rubber rib, a metal rib if you so choose, a silicone tool. You can use a color shaper. You can even use a wood tool. For me, I like to start with my wood tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick my wood tool inside my mug, and the first thing I'm going to do is go in the direction that the clay is laying, and I'm going to smooth it in that direction and pull that clay over that seam. Not against the fold, but with the fold. And I'm just going to smooth that out a little bit and try to make that seam less visible. And just get my wood tool wet. I have a bowl of water over here with a sponge in it so that I'm not dripping wet anything. I'm just taking my tool and sliding it across my wet sponge into the dry part so that I have moisture but not drippy wetness. And that just helps to get a nice smooth transition of smoothing out this seam so that I don't end up gouging the inside of my mug, which I don't want to do. And how much you finesse this is completely up to you. Now I've gotten most of the way down, and now I'm going to flip my cylinder over so that I can get this very little end part here. and just smoothing this seam. And I'm using my hand against the outer wall so I'm not pressing it out and misshaping my mug cylinder. And just fanning out. And again, just like before, you're going to stay with the motion of the fold, not against it, because as you pull against it, you're actually reopening that seam. So we want to go in the direction of the seam around our mug wall and spreading that clay out and closing up that seam. And I think that's pretty good. It's not horrible. I can finesse it some more with a rib tool. You can just smooth that out, but I plan on bellying out this mug. So I'm kind of okay with what it looks like at the moment. And as you can see, I don't have that horrible funky lump up here. So now that that's done, I'm going to flip my mug back over and I'm going to stick my mug plug up here, because there's a couple things that you can do with your mug plug for making your base. I'm just going to take some plastic and fold it around just so that my clay body doesn't get any more dry, so that when I connect the base to my mug, it's not going to be too dry. And I'm just going to set that off to the side for right now. So now we're going to move on to cutting the base for our mug and the handle for our mug. So we're going to start with the handle because the handle is going to have to set up. And the time that it's going to take us to attach our base to our mug is a really nice length of time for your handle to be sitting out and getting a little set up so that you can later attach it to your mug. I just take, for the sake of time, I kind of slice a chunk of clay off of my bagged clay and I just kind of slam it out. That's probably maybe an inch thick. So I know I have a good thickness for pulling a handle. Now, you can pull a handle the traditional way, where you hold the end, you hold it over a bucket of water, and you use your thumb and your finger pulls to pull a mug handle. Or you can use an extruder, a handle extruder. I personally like this because it's faster. And when I'm hand building, the less water I can put on my pieces, the better off I am, because I want to keep that dryness level even throughout my mug. So I just simply take my diamond core or whatever handle extruder tool you might have, or you can pull your handle if you so choose. And I'm just going to pull it through this chunk of clay and peel out my handle. Then I'm going to take this and roll it back up so that it doesn't get dried out, and I will probably slam wedge this into another block and use it later for another handle. All right, so now we have a pretty good length of handle. It's always going to be too long depending on how long your slab is that you're cutting it from, or how long you pull it, and that's okay. That gives us some finessing time to do it. I just like to take my fingers and just kind of run it over and smooth it out, because this clay is it's a buff with grog, and a lot of times when I use this, it pulls the little grog bits and it leaves these little linear lines, and so I just like to take my finger and smooth those over. And now we're going to take our handle and I'm just going to smush this end down a little bit so that it'll set up. And then I'm just going to do the shape that I like. And the shape of your handle is, again, that's an in the eye of the beholder issue. You shape your handles however you choose to shape your handles, and I'm sure they'll be fine. I'm just going to take this and I'm going to set it aside, and I'm going to let it set up while I work on the base of my mug. So I have another little piece of clay already rolled out here that I'm going to use for the base of my mug. I'm also going to use my Mugg Plugg to cut out my cylinder for the base of my mug. Now there's two ways you can do this. You can use the base of your Mugg Plugg, and by using the base of your Mugg Plugg, your bottom of your mug is going to actually set inside of your cylinder. So I'm going to do both of these, and I'm going to show you both ways. So if you use the base, and then I'm just going to take a pen tool, a needle tool, whatever you want to call it, and I'm just going to spin my Mugg Plugg while I cut out my base for my circle. Ta-da, there we go. Done. The other way you can cut your base is using the top portion. And using this as the base, this for the template for your base, is going to give you enough clay that you're going to overlap your cylinder. So we're going to set this up here, and I'm just going to trace this out as well. Also using, wrong one, my needle tool. It's just kind of easier for me anyway. You use what's best for you. Some people use biscuit cutters or cookie cutters to cut out their base. I am using the Mugg Plugg to show you that you don't need those things. Everything you need to create a mug exists right here. So as you can see, I now have two different sizes of circles for my base. Now, if you like your base to sit inside your clay body, use the smaller one. If you like that overlap so you can fold over and make sure that you get a good connected seam, or you want to belly out your body and make it a little wider at the base than it is straight off the cylinder, you can do that. And this will be the one that you want to do. So you'll want to use the top of your Mugg Plugg for the oversized base, and you'll want to use the bottom if you want a straight walled, smaller based mug. So now I'm just gonna get rid of this scrap over here. We're just going to slap that over there out of our way for now. All right. And of course, because I cut these with the needle tool, they're all nice and jaggedy, because you really shouldn't use a needle to cut your clay, but you know, you can. I'm just going to take my finger, dampen it on a wet sponge, and I'm just going to smooth these out and get rid of these little boogers that like to pop up when you use a needle to cut your clay. Not a big deal. It's just going to help me when it comes time to set my base on my cylinder. Okay, like I said, my bases are ready. We go back to our cylinder, and I'll show you now the difference between using the top of your Mugg Plugg and using the bottom to create the base of your mug. So making sure that my texture is facing the right direction. If you use the larger size, you can see it's going to set right on top. It's perfect. It is the perfect size for the base of your mug. It's going to fit your cylinder wall evenly. Now, if you're choosing to use the smaller base, here's something that you need to keep in mind. And I'm going to do this for stability reasons. I'm going to slide my cylinder back on to my Mugg Plugg. And I'm going to leave a little bit of space because I need to take my base and line it up with the bottom of my Mugg Plugg, and then push my cylinder, which is easier to do. Let me just move this banding wheel out of the way so that y'all can see what I'm doing. So you're going to want to leave a little bit of edge here, if this is the method you're choosing, if you want your base to sit inside your mug. Now you can set your Mugg Plugg up, and let me just adjust this so you can see what I'm doing here. You're going to set your Mugg Plugg up on its base, and you've got that. It's barely maybe 1/8 of an inch. You now have this space that you need to deal with. What you can do is you can allow this to remain sitting high, and you can make this into a foot. And the way to do that is you're going to take your small base, you're going to slip and score your edge. You're going to slip and score your edge on the inside of your mug. You're going to set your base back inside. You're going to set it up like this on its end. And then you're going to push the sides of your mug in this direction all the way around to connect that base to this sidewall. When you do that, you create a foot. So now you're going to take a smoothing tool and you're going to smooth all around that, and you now have a foot with a recessed bottom. That's one way to do it. Some people want it even and flat. Just slide your body down. You're still going to slip and score that inner wall and that edge of that cylinder circle, and you're going to press them together. You're just going to push, 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 push all the way around until you get a nice seal. Now, doing it this way, I would say you need to use a coil on the inside of your mug just to make sure that you have a good connection that's not going to leak later and it's not going to pop. Now, that's if you choose to use the small base for your cylinder. And now that I've got it pressed in there, I'm going to have to pull my side apart a little bit. To get, see, this is why I did it with craft foam earlier. Is once you get it in there, it doesn't want to come out. There we go. So now we're going to do it with the oversized base. And I think this is probably the more commonly used way, where the base is just a little wider than the top. Now, before you go setting your bases inside of your mugs or on the tops of your mugs, if you put your stamps, your maker's mark on the bottom, you want to do it before you attach it to your mug. If you're using the small base, set your circle back on the base, take your stamp, your maker's mark. If you're putting a texture in, you want to do it now. You have this to press against, so you're not going to deform your circle. Where if you put it on the base of your mug, now you risk caving it in, you risk warping the edge, and then you don't have a mug in round anymore, and your base is going to be a little wonky. So choose to do it at this stage before you actually apply it to the mug. And again, the smaller base fits the bottom. You can press your maker's mark in. You can take a textured roller and roll a texture into it. You could also do that before you cut it out. Because I'm using the bigger base, I'm just going to set this aside for something later. And I'm just going to take my maker's mark, and I'm just going to set that. Actually, that's the inside. Make sure you have the outside, not the inside. I'm going to set that here. And I'm going to press that in, kind of rock it around. Make sure my maker's mark is in there good. And I like a little bit of a border with my maker's mark, so I'm just going to take this little edge roller here. And while I have my maker's mark pressed into the bottom, I'm just going to line this roller up with the edge of that. And I'm just going to roll it around that outer edge of my maker's mark to give me a little decorative framework like that. I'm going to flip that over. I'm going to take my score tool and I'm going to score the outside edge of my mug base with a little bit of slip and a scoring tool. And you really only have to go, I would say 1/4 of an inch is plenty. Any more than that, and you're going to have a lot of scratch and score to clean up on the inside of your mug. Some people like a really wet slip and score, some like it more dry. It's really going to depend on the wetness of the clay as you're working with it. So make sure your base is nice and slipped and scored. Flip your mug cylinder over. Make sure you slip and score both pieces to get a nice clean connection. And again, I'm kind of slipping and scoring at the same time. I just have my scoring tool that sits in my bowl of slip. Just like that. And then we're going to take our cylinder. We're going to turn it over. We're going to line it up with our base that we've got cut. And we're going to try to make sure it's even all the way around. You're like, oh no, it's too big. No, it's supposed to be too big. Let me tilt this back down so you can see it better. So you're going to have this little bit of an edge. I like to take my hand and just kind of tap as I'm turning. Or you can pick your mug up and just tap a little bit just to kind of make sure you're getting that really good connection. And you'll see the slip squishing out and squishing out on the inside of your mug as well. Just like that. Then I like to take, you want something with a flat edge. Like this silicone tool has a nice flat edge. You can use the edge of a tool like this. You could even use your rib. But what I like this for, actually, I'll use this wood tool just because I think you'll be able to see the edge of it better. I think the gray tool is going to blend in with our clay more. So I'm just going to show you with this, and I'm going to take this and push into the bottom of the base. I'm going to lift and I'm going to turn at the same time. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to hold the top of this. It wants to slide across my board here. So I'm not pressing, I'm just holding it to keep it from sliding. And you're pressing in as you're turning. And this is closing your seam. You're just pressing and turning and pressing and turning, and you're pressing into the mug wall. And once you see that's all folded up and you have a nice connection there, pick up those little tidbits, you know that you're going to have a really good join. Now you can also use this tool to clean that up a little bit, because you're going to have, you can see in places where there's some slip squished out, and you don't want to leave that on there. So again, you can take any kind of a tool, a rib. I'm just going to continue on with this tool because you can see it. And I'm going to turn it so that it's concave like this. And so I'm not going to rub it against the wall of the mug. I'm not pushing it in. I'm just holding it in one place. I'm just going to center this a little bit so I don't end up digging my wall. I'm just going to hold it just over the edge so that it picks up all this slip here. And I'm just going to run it around because I don't want that slip to climb up the wall of my mug and make another mess for me to clean later. You can also turn it out this way and it'll collect on the back side. So if you like that better, it just picking up that slip. Or like I said, you can take a silicone tool and just take that excess slip, because you don't want to leave that on there. It's just going to make cracks, and then you'll be chasing cracks. And we're just going to wipe that out. Now that the bulk of that extra slip is gone, I've just kind of taken it and scraped it on the edge of my slip bowl. You can see I've just kind of globbed it on the edge, and I did that for a reason. Wiping off my tool. I'm now just going to take my bevel tool. You can take this kind of a tool, any kind of bevel. If you have a foot maker tool, you can use that also. And I'm just going to trim off that excess outer layer. And this also just helps to really reinforce that seam. I don't ding it into my thumb. So now we have a much cleaner foot area. And I'm just tossing that into my slip bowl. You can take your finger and press it in and go around. Again, this is really just a matter of how much finessing you want to do to clean up your mug. You can use a rib tool and just smooth that around. And then from there, we need to work on the inside. There are a couple different ways to do this. Again, you can use a wood tool. You can use a silicone tool. Your rib's probably not going to work down in that corner. You can use a potter's thumb, which I also have a potter's thumb, to get into that corner and seal the base and the wall inner seam together. One thing I like to do is use a brush, and this is just my crappy slip brush. Don't use an expensive brush. It's not worth it. I just get it a little wet in my slip water. I stick it down in that edge between the base and the wall, right in this little crease. And then I just spin and press to seal that inner seam. It is not centered. Sorry, making everybody dizzy. And we're just going to use this brush to close up this seam and this slip. Back and forth, round in circles, whatever you need to do. If you need to pick up a little bit of clay, you can always roll a coil if you're more comfortable with rolling a coil. You can roll a coil and press that coil into that seam. But I don't find it necessary when I use the bigger base on the bottom. You may need that with the smaller base. So now that we're at this point in our making, and again, how much you finesse your mug is completely up to you. Now we're going to move on to setting our handle and designing the shape of our mug. Some people prefer their mugs to have something other than a straight wall. And if you're one of those people, that's great. To each their own. I personally like a little flavor in the shape of my mug. I'm just taking a damp sponge. I'm just going around the rim of my mug and dampening it up a little bit, because I like to add a little sexy flair to my mug shape. And I need my rim to be a little damp in order to manipulate it. I also take that damp sponge and I run it down inside the body. because I am now going to take my rib and flare out my body and shape my top. And how I do that, I can find my right mud tools here. I have a little tray of mud tools, so I'm digging through ribs. I like the yellow rib to do this with, and I like the red rib. They're kidney shape. They come in all different sizes. For the bottom part of my mug where I really want it to belly out, I use this part of the mud rib. And then as I work my way up the side, I tilt it so that it goes to that thinner. So you get a shape kind of like this. So I start fat out wide, and then as I go, I move up like this. I also like to flare out. I like to tuck a waist and flare out my edge. And again, it's, whatever you want, whatever shape you desire. But if you want to flare out your body, take your mug tool or your rib. You're going to move in a sweeping motion on the inside of your clay body, sweeping out to create, while you're holding it against your hand, to create that lovely lady shape or the little chubby belly. If you like a chubby mug, I kind of like a chubby mug. It gives it some character, But I'm just going to flare this out until it reaches the level of plumpness that I like in my mug shapes. I'm going to have to stand up for this because I need to see it better. And I'm just flaring it out. And I go in both directions. Just to make sure that I don't end up with a weird warp in my wall. And you can see I'm starting to develop a bit of a belly there. And I'll just continue to do that and move my hand up and down until I've created, like I said, the desired look that I'm trying to achieve. You can do less, you can do more. It really is up to you. This is also a time that you can go back in and just kind of reassess your seam. If you've pushed any clay was smooth down at one point and is deciding to come back to life, you can use your smoothing tools to smooth that out. I'm not really being particular about it today, just for time's sake, because I can spend 15 hours on a mug if you let me. So now we're going to move on to shaping our rim and creating our little waist. And like I said, I want a nice moist rim for this because I'm going to be manipulating the shape of this clay. It's not overly wet, but it's wet enough that I'm gonna really be kind of twerking on its shape here. All right, so the rim rounder, the Mugg Plugg rim rounder, is fabulous for creating those little shapely mugs that I love. I'm just going to set my Mugg Plugg rim rounder inside of my cylinder. This keeps it round and lets me shape it. Because it has that tapered shape, I can then take my finger and just roll, spin and roll, and create this nice little waistline. And you can do this as dramatically as you like or as subtly as you like. It really is a matter of what you find appealing in your mug style. And I think my clay is just a little too set up for this. I had this all ready to go, and my husband was on the phone with my daughter-in-law because we'll be getting our grandkids here in the next week and a half or so. And little Missy got herself into some little troubles at school. So we were trying to formulate a plan so that she understood that consequences for our actions follow through to Mimi and Papa's house. And he interrupted my recording, so I had to start over. Now, I'm purposely pushing this in because I want to show you something. As I told you before, my clay was getting a little dry thanks to my husband's interruption. But this is not the end of the world. This is fixable. The fact that we have this in here, this lovely little rim rounder, is going to give us the stability that we need to close this. And again, this is where our seam is, so this is why it's going to crack here. This is your most vulnerable space. So I'm just taking my finger and I'm dampening it on a sponge. And I'm going in the direction that you folded. So, and back. In the direction and back. I'm pushing and pulling and pushing and pulling and pushing and pulling so that I create a new join. And then I'm just going to take that same finger and I'm just going to run it around that top edge and roll that sharp edge over. And you can apply a lot of pressure here because you have this rim rounder in. It is holding your circle while allowing you to manipulate the clay and add a lot of pressure that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do because it would push your rim out of, it would push you out of round. And I'm just going to take a quick look at it here and make sure that's nice and sealed. Making sure I don't have anything I don't like about it. And again, if you left it up to me, I could fiddle and finesse and mess around with one piece for endless hours, probably days. I'm a little OCD, so I get sucked into the details of things that I probably otherwise shouldn't. But it feeds a need. So now we can pop that off. And again, mine are really, really well used. Like you can see all my dry, crusty clay on here, which is why mine are not sticking. If you're new to these, or you wash them, because God knows I don't. If you wash yours, just put some cornstarch on it. If you don't feel like that's safe enough, take a little bit, dust it on your mug. Not going to hurt a thing. It's going to burn off in the kiln. And again, you'll get that nice set and that nice release. So now we now have this little bit of an edge. We can just take that and finesse a little more with a damp finger, with a sponge. I really can't use a sponge too much because like I said, this is buff clay with grog. And if I finesse it too much with a sponge, I'm just going to pull that grog to the surface. And that's not really what I'm trying to accomplish here. And this is the reason you kind of want that meaty overhang. When you're folding your flaps over, is doing this shape, I'm stressing this rim of this clay up here in the top of my rim. And by having that little bit of extra, it gives me the ability to finesse this without putting so much stress on the clay body and I'm just smoothing out this seam a little bit more without putting so much stress on the clay body that I have to be too overly concerned that it's going to split and crack down the side of my mug. I need to let my OCD tell me to walk away, step away. It's good, it's good. Now that I've finagled with it, I'm just going to pop that back in there and make sure that's all nice and even. Great. Now, I will warn you, the downside to doing this is your Mugg Plugg doesn't fit anymore. If you give it too dramatic of a waistline. Now, I didn't give it quite as dramatic of a waistline, so this actually does still fit in here for me. Not that I'm trying to put it back in there, but you can, and I'll show you why. So if you take your Mugg Plugg, after you've bellied out and you have basically the shape that you want, you're going to stick your Mugg Plugg back in your mug body. And there's a reason that we want to do this. Got to get it back in here. I'm pushing air in, so it makes it a little difficult, but it will go in. This is great for putting on our handles, which is our next step. And like I said, this normally would bother me. I'm not letting it bother me today, because we're going to cover it up with a handle. So the other fabulous thing about a Mugg Plugg, and I'm going to take this off the wheel here because it's going to just spin dandy on me and I'm going to be chasing it. And I need you to see this. So I'm going to turn it to where my seam is. Well, good Lord, did I lose it? Nope, there it is. There we go. There's my seam. Handle time. I'm going to make this square onto you. Now you can see here that my seam lines up with my handle. Hence, my handle is going to line up with my handle. So we're just going to pre-check this a little bit. And I'm just going to take a little bit of slip and just run it. I'm not going to score it yet. I'm just a little bit of slip because I'm going to mark my mug. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to line it up with my mug handle to make sure that it is exactly straight. And again, I'm not really trying to connect this to my mug yet. I'm just trying to make a mark so I know where to slip and score. And then I'm going to turn so I can see where I want the bottom to go. To see, yeah, I probably got a little too much handle there. Not a problem. We're just going to cut the bottom off a little bit. I would say probably right about such. And I think that looks better. And we'll shape it a little more once we have it attached. So again, we're going to line it up. No matter where you put it, if you put it on your seam, you don't put it on your seam, you're lining it up with your handle. So you're using your handle of your Mugg Plugg to ensure that the handle you place on your mug is straight and lined up. You can hold it that way, you can even hold it this way to make sure that it's straight. Now again, mine isn't really attached yet. I'm just checking the alignment. And then I'm just going to put a little mark on either side of the top and bottom of the base of my handle. so I know where to score it. And we're going to take our slip and score tool. We're going to find those marks, and we're going to slip, slip, slip and score. That's got a chunk of slip. We don't need that. And I'm going to slip, slip, slip and score on my mug and on my handle. Slip and score. And again, if your clay is wet enough, you may not have to do this as dramatically as I'm doing it, but mine's a little on the dry side. So now that I've gotten that accomplished, I have to stand up here. I'm just going to apply my handle. And I'm looking down on it to make sure that it lines up this way. And I can put a fair amount of pressure because I have this to press against. And I'm just going to squiggle it around, move it up and down, make sure I have a good connection. Same down here in the base. I'm going to hold it up this way to make sure that my handle is straight. And I'm going to look at it this way to make sure this handle is aligned with this handle. And now we get to finesse our handle, and this makes it so possible to get a really nice connection because you can hold your mug plug while you're cleaning out and up your connection to your mug. You're cleaning up your slip. You're making sure that you have a great connection all the way around, that you don't have gaps anywhere. And being able to have this inside of your mug as you're doing that allows you to put so much more pressure to ensure a good seal than you otherwise would have if you were only using your hands. This is, I swear to you, the best tool. It's nice to have that insurance of that structure inside my mug so that I know all the tedious finessing that I'm doing isn't warping or misshaping my mug. I can make sure I get a really nice connection on my handle to my mug. And even applique, if you are pressing out flowers and adding them to your mug, having the Mugg Plugg just takes that job and makes it so much easier because you have this. You can apply that pressure and make sure that your appliques are firmly adhered to your clay body, whether you're making a plate or a mug. Well, not a plate or a mug. It's not a plate plug, it's a Mugg Plugg. I just referenced a plate because I just made a plate with a bunch of appliques and the little booger warped. But that's okay. It's not going to do that with the Mugg Plugg because, again, I can put a lot of pressure, and I mean a lot of pressure into that, and it's not going to take my mug out around. I'm going to get a great connection from my handle to my mug body. I can go around and clean it up. I don't have to worry about bumping my rim and distorting it and just, all those lovely things that can happen while you're making that make you want to pull your hair out later. This just makes it so easy. Now that that's all on and connected and cleaned up all around my edges, all of my seams are joined, all of my slip overflow is cleaned up off my mug, it's all nice and pretty. You can just about call this bad boy done. Now I can take out my Mugg Plugg. And I've just got to finesse it a little bit because it traps a little bit of air in that bottom. But if I just wiggle it enough, it comes out. And it doesn't distort the inside of my mug. That is just discoloration in my clay because there was a little bit of powder on there. So as you can see, my seams are closed on the inside and I don't have a great big ring in there. I have a nice little shape and a flare. I have a cute little belly. My handle is securely attached all the way around. Oops, I dinged it with my finger. I have to go back and fix that. But you can go all around. Even like to take a brush sometimes because that can be helpful. You rinse some of this slip off of here. You can always take a brush and brush around your joins to make sure you don't. So I rock climb. My husband and I rock climb. And my fingers look like man hands. They are rough and they are calloused and they are horrible. So for me to use my fingers to smooth something out, it doesn't look all that finished because my fingers are not smooth. But a damp brush, just brushed over it, takes all those trashy finger marks out of it. And I call it trashy not because it's trashy, because my fingers are trash. They are so callous. There is chunks of skin, flaps of skin hanging. That is, you know, a combination of climbing rocks and playing in the dirt all the day long. But that's okay. I don't need pretty hands to make pretty mugs. And there we have it. A mug made with a few hand tools and a Mugg Plugg. Thanks, guys. I hope you had a good time. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact Corey and Carrie, and I'm sure they would be glad to answer any questions you might have. Make sure you stop by and check out the Mugg Plugg store and look at all the wonderful different pieces that they offer. We showed the 314 today. They also have the 358, which is a little sturdier. It's a little wider, a little more chunky, makes great man mugs. They've got the TCB, which is your tapered Mugg Plugg. They have the 3T, which is more like a tumbler. They even have the 2T, which is a more slender. There's so many. There's so many. They have a great little T-spout maker. And what I love about the T-spout maker is this awesome little anvil on the bottom. So something I like to do, because we have this nice flat bottom to this mug, I'm just going to flip my mug over. And I use the anvil and I just I center it and I just roll it. And now I have this great little concaved base that plays like a very purposeful foot. Me and my warbly fingers will ding up anything. Lots and lots of wet finger. But now I have this nice little concave foot ring. So I have a nice flat ring here, and the center is concave. Just a little decorative design. And yes, it even concaves in the bottom. Oop, I got a little booger there with my rib. Gosh darn ribs. That's all right. Nothing a little smoothing can fix. Think outside the box. You'd be surprised the things you can come up with. Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful day. So to show you how to do the base that sits on the inside of the mug, we're going to start with the cylinder that we left off with in the previous video. And I'm just going to show you how to do the base that sits on the inside of the mug. So we have our base already that we cut from the previous video. I'm just going to do something a little different this time. I'm just going to roll a little bit of a texture into it. And add my maker's mark. Just my little initials. And you can see we've got our textured base with my initials. And now we're going to apply them to the bottom of our mug base. Now remember from the previous video, we've already done all the finessing of the seams and all of that beautifulness. So now we're going to move on to applying our base so that we create a foot. So the first thing we need to do is take the base of our mug and place it on the base of our Mugg Plugg, just to make sure that we have a nice fit, and you can see that we do, and we have plenty of space on the edge. We're going to then take our cylinder part of our mug, we're going to stand it up on its end, and we're going to push the base, leave the base down, and we're going to push the walls up over the edge so you end up with an overhang. Okay, then we're just going to take our little silicone tool, you can take a needle tool, anything, just to kind of put a little bit of a mark on the inside of our cylinder wall so we know where we're going to slip and score. We're going to slide our wall up off of our base. We're going to take our lovely little slip and score tool, and we're just going to go around the inside of our cylinder, and we're going to slip and score the inside wall of our base. We're going to do the same thing to the edges of the base of our mug. We're just going to go around the edges, and we're just going to slip and score those too. Now, it's important to remember you're going to want to probably add some cornstarch to your Mugg Plugg at this point, to the sidewalls and to the base, because we're introducing slip, and that slip can cause our mug clay bodies to stick to our handy dandy Mugg Plugg. So I'm just going to take a little sprinkle canister here. I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit on our base. I'm going to use my little makeup brush and just kind of swish it around. Make sure I get plenty of it on there. And I'm going to stick this in. Make sure that you're putting your base on with your maker's mark facing up. Otherwise, it's going to end up on the inside of your mug and going to get covered up by glaze, and that's not so fun. I'm just putting a little bit of stuff in there. All right. So now we're going to slide our cylinder back on. Make sure you leave enough space at the top that we end up with that little bit of a lip. I'm just going to set this in my lap here so you can see what it is I'm doing. Now, if you want to create a foot on your mug, kind of a cheater foot, you're going to leave that to sit above your base so that as you push your sidewalls in, you've created this foot. And you're going to want to do this evenly all the way around because, as I said before, the base of the Mugg Plugg is tapered on the 314 and the 358. It is tapered smaller than the upper part of the body. So we're just going around and we're pressing that clay into that base ring. Making sure that we get a nice connection and that it's even all the way around the Mugg Plugg. Just pressing that in. And you're just going to keep manipulating it until they sit together. And it's not going to happen the first time you go around because, like I said, it's a little bigger. So you just got to keep manipulating it until all your sides come together. Okay? Once you get to that stage, we're going to start to take our finger and we're just going to barely push over our edge. We're going to roll it over all the way around. We're just going to roll that edge all the way around with our finger. You're not smashing it into the bottom, you're just rolling that edge over. And I'll stand this up here in just a second and show you what I mean by that, what that's going to look like. And you're going to take your smoothing tool or your color shaper, you're going to go around that inside of that edge and you're just going to kind of smooth that slip into those creases. You're just going to push it down into the creases to close off that seam. And if you're a little light-handed with your slip, you can always go back and just add a little bit of slip. You're just pushing it into that seam. Not so much that you're creating a muddy mess, but just enough to seal, give you a little bit of glue, basically, to close off that seam. So it starts to look more closed in like this. and you're just pressing it in with your fingers so the wall meets the base. Running your smoothing tool, your color shaper, whatever it is you have, the end of a paintbrush, an actual paintbrush. Lots of things work for this. I just like my color shapers. You're going to press in again and just make sure you have that connection. And I keep having to add slip, so not a lot, just a little bit. So you can see here, we've closed that seam. And now our bottom sets in our little somewhat fake foot ring. So it's okay if your base sits inside your mug. We can still work with that. It's not the end of the world. We have techniques for how to make that work in our advantage. So let me just grab, I'm just going to grab one of my little bat inserts here, and I'm going to now turn my mug over. And this is where it gets important. We're going to just slightly press down. We're going to slightly press down to make sure that our foot is even all the way around our mug. And this is to ensure that once it's fired and glazed and is now of use to someone, they don't end up with this topsy-turvy, wibble-wobble, you know, like the little Weeble toys that our kids had when they were little. It doesn't end up like that. And you can see you've created somewhat of a fake little foot. And then if you want to go in and really finesse this and, you know, make it fancy or whatever you like, you can do that. To each their own. I am going to take my roller. This is just a little 3D printed roller, and I'm just going to roll it across the top of my foot. Just so it puts a little bit of design into the foot ring. So just a little something. Then you can see here where I had a little bit of a slip of my tool here. Not a big deal. We just go back and fix that and roll that out so that my foot looks a lot more even than where I goofed it up and slipped with my tool. But there you can see it's sealed up. You've taken your tool and you've closed all your seams and you smoothed them all out like that. That's how I did that last time, little bugger. It just wants to slip off my little rim edge right there. And there you have it. And then if you look at it this way, you can see where that base just kind of rolls in. Now, you can accentuate that a little more. I'll just grab my banding wheel here. Boy, I tell you, these things are heavy little buggers. They'll last a lifetime. We're just going to slide that over. And you can see where this bevels in compared to the top. I'm just going to take my finger and just kind of accentuate that just a little bit more. Not a lot. I'm not making it overly dramatic. If you don't like that texture going all the way down to the bottom, you can take a potter's thumb or a rib. You can take a silicone sculpting tool. You can press it into the bottom and spin it to really create some separation from your textured part of your body to your base, so that that fake foot from the bottom transitions into your sidewall. So I'm going to do that now just to show you what it looks like. Not that I think it needs anything else, but let me find a shape that I like here. I'm going to use this shape. So it's just a little scooped, rounded off edge. This is actually just a cheapy little wooden tool. I think this came in a starter kit of some kind. But if I hold that up against there and hold my Mugg Pluggs, because this is not adhered to my bat, I'm just holding it so it doesn't scooch out of the way. And I'm just going to press it and create a little indentation that follows through with the concept that I have a foot on my mug. Now again, it's an aesthetic choice. It's not necessary. It's completely up to you. So now you can see I have what really looks to be more like a genuine foot that follows through to the bottom. So this is one of the upsides to using the actual base of the Mugg Plugg to create the base of your mug. You have that inner, it's sitting inside, and your wall is larger, so you can create that fake foot look, and it looks more like more along the lines of what a thrown and trimmed mug might look. And then just to finesse it just a little bit, because again, I'm a little crazy that way. Alrighty. And there we have that. And you don't have to add the texture to your foot like I did. I like texture. To me, more is more when it comes to texturing and designing a mug. I'm just taking this silicone tool and I'm just making sure I'm compressing this upper rim just to make sure I don't get any cracking or splitting. And I think this mug, I think I'm going to leave it a straight sidewall, which is really out of the norm for me. I don't normally do that. But for some reason, I just kind of like the way this is looking right now. So I'm just going to leave it a nice straight wall. And then from here, you can decide where you want your handle. If you want the handle on the seam. Now here I took this little rolling tool here and I rolled it up my rim and then pressed my rim together so I had some texture to kind of hide it. Then I took my pin, I lined it up with my egg. You can see my egg here. I lined my egg up and I rolled it up my seam to try to help kind of make it a little more incognito. So now that I have this done, I'm going to set this off to the side and I'm going to leave it just like this. And I'm just going to wrap a little bit of plastic around it just to ensure that it doesn't get too dry while I'm working on my handle. It's going to stay nice and moist for me. Now back to what I had showed you in the previous video of quick handles. Super, super quick, non-finicky, no stress. Let's just cut a handle. So I cut it in that side already. And you can see I don't really have enough cutting space. We're going to fix that. We're going to slam wedge this bad boy. So I'm going to do it over here because if I do it here, it's going to shake the camera. So I'm picking it up and I'm slamming it on the table and I'm turning it every time I do. And this is slam wedging. I'm just slamming the clay onto the wood table so that I can re-pull another handle. And again, my apologies for the noise. And I'm just smacking it down with my hand. And voila. All over again. So now I have a nice smooth slab to cut my handle from. I'm just going to take my handle cutter, and there's all different shapes of these. This is the one, it kind of looks like a teddy bear head or a little koala bear or a paw. I'm not sure, whatever you want to call it. And that's just the one I seem to gravitate towards for the most part, unless I'm trying to do something specific. And I'm just going to push it into my clay and I'm just going to drag it through, just like last time. Peel out my handle, easy peasy. And then I'm just going to fold that over while it's nice and wet and flimsy from my little slam wedge session over there. And it'll make it easy to slam wedge it again. You don't have to do it this way. You can pull handles, as I've said before. You can pull them the traditional way, which I like to do when I'm throwing mugs. I don't particularly like to do that when I'm hand building, only because now I have two different wetnesses of clay, and sometimes that can cause its own problems, like handles popping off in a firing. So now that I have my handle pulled, and again, I'm just going to run my fingers over it because this is a groggy clay, and when I pull my handle extruding tool through the clay, it does tend to leave some little streaks where the grog comes to the surface from the metal tool dragging through it. So I just smooth that out and then we're good to go. And then I just decide, okay, what's going to be the top, what's going to be the bottom. This one looks a little nicer, so if I have to cut off, I'd rather cut off down here. So I'm just going to make this, if I can find my clay knife, I'm just going to take this and cut the end of it so that it's got a nice straight end. And throw that in my slip. I'm going to take my little insert here. I'm going to press this, kind of flatten it out a little bit, and then decide on the shape of the arc that I want for my handle. And I'm just finessing the little edges where I cut it so they're not straight and sharp. And just kind of shaping that inside a little bit. And then making sure that it's nice and straight. I think that's probably the shape I want. Since I have all of this excess, I'm just going to take, actually I want a longer knife here. I'm just going to take this clay knife and I'm going to kind of cut it at an angle. So it cuts in this direction. And that'll help me when I'm trying to smooth it into the body of my mug. We're just going to cut that at an angle this way. Make sure that's straight, because I guess I'm a little crooked girl. I'm sitting crooked or something's crooked. And I'm just going to put this in here with my extra clay scraps, and we'll wedge that up again later. And then just shape that. And now I have my handle. Bring back my mug. Unwrap it. I don't flop it all over the place. Set it back up there. Move it off to the side. Okay. All right, here we go. Let's see. Where's my seam? There's my seam. Now again, you don't have to place your handle on your seam. It's just kind of what I do. And as I said earlier, we're going to line the seam up with the handle. Or I'm sorry, we're going to line the handle up with the handle of the Mugg Plugg along our seam. So you kind of have that double insurance policy of, is this straight? Is this not straight? We're going to mark it. I'm going to put just a little bit of slip, and this is a little wet because I didn't let it set up very well. But that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and slip it and score it. No biggie. And we're just going to line it up with our mug here. And we're going to let it put some marks from the slip onto our mug. Then I'm going to turn it towards me just so I can make sure that it's straight. But basically all you're doing is you're just placing it so that slip leaves a mark for where you want your base and where you want the top of your handle to be. And I actually want it to be a little lower, more like right there. And then we're just transposing that slip onto our mug so we know where to score it. It'll also stick well enough for me to look at it and say, okay, is it straight? Is it not straight? Before I really scratch up my mug, I'm going to look at it and make sure I'm looking this straight on. And I'm going to also look from the top down to ensure that my mug handle is indeed straight. All right, and then I'm just going to put a little mark with my knife. Pop that back off. And now I'm going to take my scoring tool, and where that slip left a mark, I'm just going to slip and score the wall of my mug. And then I'm going to re-slip and score my actual handle. Actually, I think I'm going to cut a little more of this handle off. I think it's still just a wee bit long. All right. And now I'm going to place my handle. I'm going to start with the top. I'm just going to wiggle, wiggle. wiggle, wiggle, push, little wiggle, wiggle, push. All right, and then I'm going to place my bottom of my handle. And I'm going to do the same thing, just little wiggles and little pushes. And before I adhere that too much, I'm just going to make sure that it's lined up. So we're looking for straightness here. We're making sure that it's straight with our handle so we know that it's aligned. You can even tip it up this way as I showed before. Oh, look, it's got just a little, or that's me, sorry. See, it's straight there too. Now we can go into the finessing of making sure that we clean up all of our margins of slip where we've connected our handles to our mugs. Smooth everything out, make it beautiful. Clean up all that extra excess slip so we don't end up with nasty little boo-boos of handles flying off, popping off, breaking off, cracking off, all the things that handles can sometimes be doomed to do. We're just cleaning that up with my rubber tool here, wiping the excess on the wet sponge in the bowl over here that I showed you earlier. I'm also going to use this, I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to use the stick, kind of press and roll down my handle on the inside just to make sure it's setting nice and flush and flat with the curve of my mug. I don't always do this. Sometimes I like it to be more pronounced, but for some reason I just want it to be a little flatter in here. Then I'm going to, again, clean that slip up with my rubber tool. We're going to do the same on this side. It's going to clean that up. I'm sorry, my stool decided to scream. I wonder if that's a sign that it thinks I'm fat. I don't know. I don't care. It's going to do its job anyway. Just finessing up all the little joins, cleaning up the slip, making sure. I keep having to twist and turn to get to a place in the light where I can actually see what I'm doing, that it's not creating a shadow for me. Then I can set it back down and I can come in here to this inside seam and finesse and clean that up as well. Just remember, if you don't clean your excess slip up, it can cause problems. It will make your handles crack when they dry. And it can make them pop off in a firing. Sometimes you find out in the bisque. Sometimes it really likes to mess with you. And it'll wait until you've bisque fired it, glazed it with all those pricey glazes that we all love so much. And then you'll fire it and then open the kiln thinking, oh, I'm going to have this beautiful piece, and I've been waiting and waiting, and you open the kiln lid and devastation. It has popped its handle. So make sure you clean up all that excess slip. Do the finessing. That saying, the devil is in the details, is absolutely true when it comes to pottery, I have found. All right, and then once I've done that, I just go in and just apply a little bit more pressure just to make sure. I'll take another good look. I bumped it. That's all right. Just smooth it out with the finger. All is good. Maybe my smoothing tool right here. I bumped it. No biggie. Make sure I just smooth that little boo-boo out. There we go. I have a nice smooth handle. Just wet my finger a little bit more. All right. Just going to smooth that out a little bit more. Right, push that clay around to the side. There we go. No harm, no foul. Do the same on this side. And all is well with our mug. Then we're just going to remove it from the plug. And this can take a little bit of finessing just because he's been on there. We got some slip in there. There's some air trapped in there a little bit. There we go. And it doesn't take a lot of effort. You're just really taking your fingertips and just pushing up. And then voila, he comes right out. Now we're going to work on that inner seam. Same concept as before. You can use a brush and some slip. You can use a silicone tool. And I'll show you before I do it all. So you can see there's a little bit of a gap in there. You can see where I started to smooth it. So we're basically just taking this tool, we're setting it in this crease, and we're sealing it as we go. We're going around, back and forth, round and round, back and forth, just to seal up that little bit of a seam gap there. Like I said, you could use a rubber tool, you could use a brush. Use a brush, put some slip on it. I'm sorry, it got kind of crusty. I just need to get it wet a little bit. My water bucket over here. Now we can run some slip on it, and we're just going to go around and around and around on the inside and seal that up. For those of you who like to use a coil, you are more than welcome to use a coil if that's your jam. I do sometimes, it just depends. I think I do coils more when I make tankards just because of the weight and the size of the mug. Not necessarily that it needs one. I just like that little bit of insurance policy because tankards are such a large piece, and you're really asking a lot of this way of connecting a seam. To do it with something the size of a tankard and not having that little bit of insurance policy. And I'm playing, I'm finessing. And I'm just going to take my sponge and wring all the water out of it just so it's moist. And then I'm just going to run it across my rim very lightly because, again, this is groggy clay. And it don't like to be wiped around too much without bringing the grog to the surface. But I'm just trying really to get some moisture back into this rim a little bit so I can smooth it out. And then I just take my fingers, run them around the edge, make sure I'm getting a nice rounded lip on my cup because we don't want sharp things touching our mouth. And clay can have some quite sharp edges when it wants to. So I'm just using my finger and I'm just rubbing out this edge just to take that sharp 90-degree angle off of it. So when you go to put your lips on this mug to drink out of it, it's not accosted by a sharp-edged rim. Now, if you've finagled too much or you've used too much water and you've pulled up some of the grog, not a big deal. Use a mud tool. These things are fabulous. You can use anything silicone, anything hard. You can use wood, any of it. Not that I've pulled any grog up, but I'm just going to show you. Just run it across whatever area you have pulled grog up on, or that you're worried that you pulled grog up on. If it just feels a little rough to your finger, just run it across there and push that grog back down into that clay. But you just don't want to use too much water on a groggy clay with a sponge, because that sponge is actually washing the clay away and exposing the grog. Anytime you want to make sure you're rechecking your round, just stick your mug plug back in your mug. Make sure everything fits nice and snug and round. And voila, we have a finished mug with our little fake foot where we inset it inside of the clay body rather than the outside. Thanks, guys.